My mother-in-law humiliated me at Christmas lunch in front of everyone, but then my niece pressed a button and the audio played, leaving Martha's face pale with despair and silencing the entire room. Before sharing what we heard in that audio, tell me where you're watching from. In the comments, click the like button and subscribe to learn how that audio changed everything that day. Sunday had that deceptive postcard glow. Golden sun, dancing autumn leaves. Martha's house, my mother-in-law, stood impeccably in the quiet Connecticut neighborhood. But I knew the truth behind the facade. The aroma of roast beef and apple pie should have been welcoming. Instead, it mingled with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. Each step toward the front door felt like walking toward the scaffold. My fingers trembled as I pressed the doorbell, a crystalline sound that heralded another Sunday of torture disguised as a family gathering. Breathe, Sarah. Just one more lunch. Martha opened the door with that smile. The same smile she wore before every attack. Sarah, dear. His voice was poisoned honey. What an interesting dress. Very brave of you. First pinprick. I hadn't even crossed the threshold. The living room was abuzz with animated conversation, laughter that sounded like shattering crystal. Each loud laugh from Martha echoed off the walls, a sound I'd learned to dread. My muscles twitched involuntarily. It was like living with a wild animal, never knowing when the next attack would come. David, my husband, kissed my cheek absently. His eyes were already seeking his mother's approval. Always his mother. Mom, Sarah brought that salad you like. But Martha hated everything I did. Oh, how sweet. Martha examined the dish as if it were evidence of a crime. I hope you followed the recipe correctly this time. The spotlight was on me. All eyes. Everyone waiting for my reaction. I forced a smile, swallowing the humiliation as I always did. The dining table was a minefield of fine china and expectations. Each piece of cutlery clinked with a rhythm that dictated the pulse of my fear. Martha, seated at the head like a queen on her throne, controlled every word, every pause, every breath. Sarah, you look pale today. Her hand touched mine, cool as marble. Is work wearing you out? Or maybe, a measured pause. The pressure of not having grandchildren yet. The silence that followed was piercing. I felt heat rise up my neck, my cheeks burning. The other family members looked away, embarrassed. But no one said anything. No one ever said anything. I leaned over to serve David more vegetables. A simple gesture. Innocent. That's when Martha attacked. The movement seemed accidental, clumsy, but I knew Martha too well. Nothing she did was an accident. The crystal-clear glass of water tilted. The icy contents poured over my face in slow motion. Water ran down my eyelashes, dripping onto my silk dress, forming a puddle of shame on my lap. The shock paralyzed me. Not from the temperature, but from the calculated cruelty of the act. Oh dear. Martha put her hand to her chest theatrically. I'm so clumsy. Forgive me. But his eyes shone. Pure satisfaction. The silence was deafening, broken only by a muffled chuckle from one of Martha's sisters. Then, the forced chuckle of her own mother-in-law as she reached for a napkin. My eyes filled. Not with water, with tears I fought to hold back. The heat of shame burned my skin. Every curious glance from my family was a sting. Pity. Embarrassment. Relief that they weren't the target. David was shocked. Mouth open. Eyes wide. But he didn't say anything. Did nothing. He just looked away, like he always did. The silent betrayal hurt more than the ice-cold water. More than any cruel words. It was proof that I was completely alone on that battlefield. I stood up on shaky legs. Excuse me. My voice came out as a strangled whisper. The bathroom became my refuge. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, wet hair stuck to my face, smeared mascara, stained dress. But the worst thing was what I saw in my eyes. Defeat. The ride home was a blur of tears and silence. David tried to touch my arm. I flinched. His touch now felt empty. Cowardly. Sarah, No. My voice was dead. Just no. That night, lying in bed, the image of the glass of water kept replaying in my mind. The coldness in Martha's eyes. David's inaction. The cruel laughter of the others. Something had broken inside me. But I didn't know yet that sometimes you have to break completely to be reborn stronger. I arrived home and the relief of walking through our door was instantly swallowed by an avalanche of pain. I collapsed on the couch. I didn't sit down, I collapsed. Like a building imploding on itself. The tears came in violent waves, sobs tearing from my throat. The salty taste mixed with the bitter taste of humiliation that still burned my tongue. My body shook uncontrollably, as if I had a fever. The silk dress clung to my skin. Wet, stained, ruined. Just like me. David hovered in the doorway of the room, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. His lips moved, forming empty words. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she." That she what? My voice came out hoarse, unrecognizable. That she would do it on purpose? That she hated me? He blinked. Confused. Of course he was confused. He never saw. I don't know what to do. His words fell like dead stones to the ground. I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. Do? You didn't do anything when she humiliated me in front of your entire family. Why would you do anything now? The silence that followed was piercing. David opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. A fish out of water. I turned to the wall, hugging a pillow to my chest. The fabric absorbed my tears, but not my pain. Nothing could absorb that. Did I deserve this? Was there something fundamentally wrong with me? The questions multiplied like viruses, infecting every thought. 3 days dragged on like 3 years. I moved around the house like a ghost. I ate without tasting. I slept without resting. Every mirror I passed reflected a smaller version of myself. That's when Lily appeared. My 8-year-old niece arrived with her mother for an afternoon visit. Golden curly hair, green eyes that seemed to see right through you. She's always had this uncanny ability to notice things adults overlook. He found me in the garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the jabuticaba tree. The leaves whispered secrets I couldn't decipher. "Aunt Sarah?" His voice was silky smooth. "Why do you look like you lost your dog?" I couldn't help but smile weakly. "I don't have a dog, Lily." "I know." She sat down beside me, swinging her little legs. "But you still have that look on your face." Her little arms wrapped around me in a tight hug. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and innocence. "Aunt Sarah," she whispered against my shoulder, "don't be sad. Grandma Martha must be jealous of you." My body stiffened. Jealous. My mom says that real adults don't need to put others down to feel big. The word enviricated through my mind like a stray bullet. Martha? Envy often. The idea was so absurd that I almost laughed. Almost. "Why do you think that, Lily?" She pulled away, looking at me with that seriousness only children possess. Because I heard her talking. My heart skipped a beat. Lily picked up her pink tablet, decorated with unicorn stickers. "I was recording a funny video in Grandma's bathroom. You know, making faces while brushing my teeth." She laughed, a crystal clear sound. But then Grandma stood right in front of the door, talking on the phone. She didn't know I was there. My blood ran cold. "And you recorded it?" "I didn't mean to." Lily threw up her hands defensively. "I just wanted to record my funny face," but the tablet picked up her voice too. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through the files and found the video. The screen showed her grimacing face in the bathroom mirror, toothpaste foaming in her mouth. But the audio was crystal clear. Martha's voice echoed from the small speaker, cold and calculating. "Of course it was on purpose, dear. That Sarah needs to learn her place. She thinks she's too important, too good for our family." My breathing stopped. Poor David, the guy. Needy, with no future of his own, he was lucky to get a wife with money. He's a hypocrite, always draining her resources to fund his fantasies. But that's fine with me. He gives me expensive gifts, seeking my approval. The words were icy daggers piercing my chest. And my husband, well, you know how crippled he is in certain areas of married life. He's lucky he has the money to afford the lifestyle I deserve. Otherwise, I would have gotten rid of this dead weight years ago. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp of shock. My sisters are two frustrated women without marriage or children. They depend on my generosity like trained dogs. They do everything I want because they know they need my charity. The audio continued for a few more seconds before Lily appeared on screen, making a final grimace. The silence that followed was absolute. Lily watched me with worried eyes. "Aunt Sarah, you've turned very pale." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The world had turned upside down. The pain of humiliation transformed into something different. Something cold. Something dangerous. Fury. Not the hot, impulsive anger that had consumed me these past few days. This was different. It was ice running through my veins. It was crystal clear. Martha had orchestrated my humiliation. She planned every detail. And worse, she despised everyone around her, including her own son and husband. I had the proof. I had her own voice condemning her. For the first time in days, she smiled. A smile Lily didn't understand, but it carried the weight of an unshakable resolve. "Lily," he said softly, "can you send me that video?" She nodded, still confused. As the file arrived on my phone, I felt something reborn inside me. It wasn't the broken and humiliated Sarah. It was something new. Something stronger. Something dangerous. Martha had planted the seeds of her own destruction. Now I would be the gardener who would make them bloom. Audio became my obsession. In the days that followed, I listened to the recording dozens of times. Martha's every word seared into my memory like a hot iron. Every cruel inflection, every condescending laugh, every sordid revelation of her true intentions. That Sarah needs to learn her place. My place? Sitting in the shadows of my office, headphones blocking out the outside world, I dissected every syllable. Her voice was a detailed map of her evil, and my route to freedom. It wasn't pain anymore that I felt. It was something crystal clear. Purpose? I rose from my chair and walked to the wall mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer the humiliated Sarah from last Sunday. My shoulders were straight. My chin was lifted. My eyes burned with a determination I didn't recognize. "I won't be your victim anymore," I whispered to my reflection. The words came out like an oath. A promise sealed in cold blood. My revenge wouldn't be destructive in the traditional sense. I wouldn't break dishes or shout accusations. That would be lowering myself to her level. But my revenge would be the naked truth, her own voice condemning her in front of everyone she manipulated and controlled. I wanted Martha to feel exactly what I felt at that lunch. The public humiliation, the feeling of being completely exposed and defenseless. But multiplied by 10. I began planning with the precision of a surgeon. Every detail mattered. The timing, the location, the audience, the impact. The audio was my secret weapon, but it needed to be used at just the right moment to ensure Martha had nowhere to run. No excuse. No way out. I took a notebook and started writing. Objective, complete exposure of Martha method, irrefutable audio location, family event with maximum attendance timing, her moment of greatest vulnerability. Every word on paper gave me more power, more control. For the first time in years, you dictated the rules of the game. I began to observe Martha with the eyes of a strategist. At the next family gathering, Aunt Helen's birthday tea, I studied her every move. How she positioned herself to be the center of attention. How she manipulated conversations to her advantage. How she sowed seeds of discord among the others. It was fascinating and disgusting at the same time. Martha noticed my stillness but misinterpreted it. Her attacks intensified, like a predator sensing weakness in its prey. "Sarah dear," she said, leaning in with that venomous smile, "you've been so off lately. Marriage problems?" Before I would have blushed, stuttered, desperately defended myself. Now I just looked into her eyes. Serene. "Why do you ask, Martha? Is there something specific you'd like to know?" My voice was smooth as silk, but there was steel underneath. She blinked, confused by my lack of reaction. "I just worry about you guys." "How kind." My smile didn't reach my eyes. "Your concern is touching." Her discomfort was palpable. Her fingers drummed nervously on the table. She didn't know how to deal with this new version of me. Excellent. That night, David tried to talk to me about my strange behavior. "You're different, Sarah," Mart's cold. I was preparing dinner, chopping onions with precise movements. The blade glided through the vegetable with surgical ease. Different how? I don't know. More distant, especially with my mom. I stopped cutting. I turned to him slowly. "Your mother publicly humiliated me, David. She poured ice water on me on purpose. And you did nothing." He opened his mouth to protest. "Nothing," I repeated, my voice sharp as the knife in my hands. "You sat there and watched your wife be humiliated by your mother. And you didn't say a word." The silence stretched between us like an abyss. "I didn't know that. That she did it on purpose?" I laughed humorlessly. "David, you've known your mother for 35 years. How could you not know?" He had no answer, because there was no answer that would absolve him. I went back to chopping the onions. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. "Things will change," she said without looking at him. "I will change." And it was true. The old Sarah, the one who accepted humiliation in silence, was dead, buried under the weight of her own weakness. In its place, something new was born. Something stronger. Something dangerous. I spent the next few weeks strengthening myself. Not just mentally, but emotionally, physically. I started doing yoga, meditating, training my posture, my breathing, my ability to stay calm under pressure. Because I knew Martha wouldn't give me any respite. At the slightest sign of my recovery, she'd intensify her attacks. She'd try to break me again. But I was ready. Every provocation from her fueled my determination. Every sharp comment, another reason to move forward with my plan. The audio remained safe on my phone, like a precious secret. Sometimes I listened to it again, not out of pain, but for motivation. That Sarah needs to learn her place. Yes, Martha, I've learned my place. My place was in control. And your place, well, you'll find out soon enough. Christmas was approaching. The perfect family event. The whole family gathered together. Martha at the height of her power and vanity. The ideal stage for your downfall. I smiled at myself in the bathroom mirror. It was a smile the old Sarah would never have recognized. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly what she was going to do. And that he didn't feel the slightest bit of remorse for it. The invitation to Easter lunch arrived by email, as always. Elegant font. Formal tone disguised as affectionate. "We look forward to seeing you at 1 p.m. for our traditional Easter celebration. Love, Martha." Before, this kind of invitation made my stomach churn. Now I just smile. It was time for the first test. I spent the morning preparing like a warrior dresses for battle. Every detail was carefully considered. A navy blue dress, elegant but not flashy. Flawless makeup, natural yet confident. Hair tied in a low bun that exposed my neck. Vulnerable but challenging. In the mirror, I practiced my new posture. Shoulders back. Chin parallel to the floor. Eyes calm but alert. The audio was saved in 3 different places on my phone. Done. David watched me nervously as I applied lipstick. "Are you sure you're okay? You look different." "Different how?" My voice was calm as still water. Controlled. I smiled at him through the mirror. Maybe I've learned to control myself. He didn't get the irony. He never did. Martha's house was decorated with white lilies and pastel colors. Perfect as always. Every detail orchestrated to impress. Just like her. Martha greeted me at the door with that smile I knew so well. Sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. "Sarah, dear." His eyes scanned me up and down, searching for flaws. "What? Sober dress. Very appropriate for your age." First pinprick. I hadn't even crossed the threshold. Before, I would have blushed. Justified myself. Tried to explain my choice. Now, I just inclined my head slightly. "Thank you, Martha. You look radiant as always." My voice was pure honey. No detectable sarcasm. She blinked, confused by the lack of reaction. Perfect. Lunch proceeded with the usual pomp. Elaborate dishes. Superficial conversation. Martha reigned over everything like a queen in her castle. I kept quiet, watching, studying. I noticed how she controlled the flow of conversation, how she directed attention to herself, how she planted little seeds of discord among family members. She was a master manipulator, I had to admit, but every master has weaknesses. And I was learning hers. The first provocation came during dessert. "Sarah," Martha said, her voice cutting through the general conversation like a blade, "you look tired, dear. Isn't married life easy?" All conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, the moment I'd been waiting for. Before, I would have stammered, denied, tried to change the subject. Now I gently placed my fork on my plate. I wiped my lips with my napkin. I looked directly into her eyes. "Why do you ask that, Martha?" My voice was soft but clear. "Is there anything specific you'd like to know about my marriage?" The silence that followed was heavy. Martha's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She expected defense. Explanations. Not a calm, direct counterattack. I just care about you guys." How sweet. My smile was serene. "And how is your marriage going, Martha? You and Uncle Robert seem so close." The irony was subtle but present, just enough to plant a seed of discomfort. She blushed slightly. "We're doing very well, thank you." "Glad to hear it." I went back to eating my pie as if nothing had happened, but something had changed in the dynamics of the table. I could feel it. The second attempt came an hour later. "Sarah, haven't you learned how to make the family carrot cake yet?" Martha asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "David has always loved this cake. It would be a shame if he never got to eat it again." The insinuation was clear. "You are not good enough for this family." This time, I didn't even stop talking to David's cousin. I just turned my head slightly in Martha's direction. "No, I haven't learned yet." My voice was casual, disinterested. "Maybe you could teach me someday. If you have time, of course." And I went back to my conversation as if Martha were irrelevant. The shock on her face was delicious. Throughout the afternoon, Martha tried 3 more times to provoke me. Comments about my career, my appearance, my lack of contribution to family traditions. Each attempt was met with the same unwavering calm. Direct answers that disarmed her provocations. Eloquent silences that forced her to fill the void with her own anxiety. I was playing a completely different game than she was. And I was winning. As we prepared to leave, Martha pulled me aside. Her fingers gripped my arm with unnecessary force. "What's wrong with you today?" His voice was low, but filled with frustration. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his eyes. "Wrong? I don't understand. You look different." "Different how?" I tilted my head, genuinely curious. She struggled for words. How could she explain that I wasn't responding to her provocations? How could she admit that her power over me had evaporated? "Forget it." She released my arm abruptly. A genuine, warm smile. "Of course, Martha. Thank you for the wonderful lunch." And I walked away, leaving her there, frustrated and confused. In the car, David was restless. My mother seemed irritated when we left. Did it seem like it? I looked out the window, watching the trees pass by. I didn't notice. "Sarah, what's going on? You were acting weird today." "Strange how?" "More cold. Distant." I turned to him. "David, your mother has tried to provoke me at least 5 times today. Have you noticed?" He was silent. "You didn't notice," I continued, "because you never notice." But I responded politely and respectfully. "How is that cold?" More silence. "Maybe," he said softly, "the problem isn't that I'm different. Maybe it's that you're finally paying attention." That night, lying in bed, I replayed every moment of lunch. Every provocation Martha made. Every response I made. Every expression of frustration on her face. The seed of overcoming was germinating. For the first time in years, I had faced Martha and emerged victorious. Not with shouting or drama, but with something far more powerful. Controlled indifference. She was used to seeing me react, to seeing me suffer. My calmness unnerved her because it removed the fuel that fueled her cruelty. Without reaction, there was no fun for her. Without fear, there was no power. And with no power over me, Martha was just a bitter woman desperately trying to maintain relevance. Smile in the dark. The game had begun. And I was just warming up. The success of the Easter lunch was like lighting a fuse. Martha couldn't process my new stance. For decades, she had orchestrated a theater in which I was the perfect victim, always reacting, always suffering, always giving her the spectacle of power she so craved. Now the stage was empty, and that made her furious. The attacks began 3 days later. The phone rang during dinner. David answered, and I heard Martha's shrill voice on the other end, even from a distance. "David, honey, I'm worried about Sarah." I stopped chewing. I paid attention. She was so strange at lunch, cold, distant. Is she okay? Maybe she needs professional help. Professional help. The insinuation was crystal clear. I was mentally unstable. David looked at me uncertainly. "Mom, she's fine. Just calmer lately." "Calm down?" Martha's voice rose an octave. "David, a wife who becomes cold to her husband's family isn't calm down. It's concerning. You need to pay attention to the signs." I smiled as I cut into my steak. Her every word was a confession of despair. The second attack came from the sisters-in-law. Lisa, David's brother's wife, called me the next day. Her voice was thick with false concern. "Sarah, Martha mentioned that you seemed different at lunch. Is everything okay between you two?" So Martha was recruiting spies. Different how? My voice was genuinely curious. "Well, though she said you were kind of hostile." "Hostile?" I laughed softly. "Lisa, you were there. I was polite the entire time. I answered all her questions politely." Silence on the other end of the line. "Perhaps," I continued, "Martha is used to a particular kind of reaction from me." And my politeness surprised her. Lisa stammered a few empty words before hanging up. Perfect. The third attempt was more direct. Martha showed up at my house unannounced one Thursday afternoon. I was working in the garden, my hands covered in dirt, when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door still wearing gardening gloves and a stained apron. "Martha?" My voice was neutral. What a surprise. She looked me up and down, clearly disapproving of my casual appearance. "Can I come in? We need to talk." "Sure." I opened the door wider. "Sorry about the mess. I was tending to the roses." She entered like a general surveying enemy territory, eyes scanning every corner, searching for flaws. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer coffee. "Sarah," she began, her voice taking on that fake maternal tone, "I'm worried about you." "Worried how?" "You've been different. Distant. David's worried too." But David hadn't mentioned anything. "Different from what, Martha?" She blinked. My direct question disarmed her. "Well, you used to be more more involved with the family." "I see." I leaned forward slightly. "And how exactly would you like me to be more involved?" Another pause. She hadn't expected me to ask for specifics. "Well, you could participate more in conversations. Ask more questions. Show more interest." "I see." My tone was thoughtful. "And when I asked questions at the last lunch, about your wedding for example, was that appropriate?" Her face flushed slightly. "That was different." "Different how?" "You were being impertinent." "But there was the naked truth." "So," he said slowly, "you want me to participate more, but only in ways you approve. For me to ask questions, but not questions that make you uncomfortable." "I didn't say that." "No." I tilted my head. "Then explain to me the difference between appropriate participation and impertinence." She opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish trying to breathe out of water. "You are twisting my words." "I'm not distorting anything, Martha. I'm just trying to understand your expectations." The silence stretched between us like a tug of war. Finally, she stood up abruptly. "I came here to help, Sarah. But I see you don't want help." "Help with what exactly?" She stopped in the doorway, looking at me with something that almost felt like fear. With your attitude. Smile. A genuine, warm smile. Thanks for your concern, Martha. But my attitude is exactly where I want it to be. After he left, I called David at work. Your mother was here. What? Why? She said you were worried about me. That I'm different. Silence. David. He mentioned you seemed calmer. I didn't say I was worried. So she lied. More silence. David, your mother lied about you to justify a visit where she tried to manipulate me into returning to my previous behavior. Do you understand that? Sarah, she just cares. She doesn't care about me, David. She cares about the control she's lost over me. I hung up before he could answer. That night, I listened to the audio again. That Sarah needs to learn her place. I laughed to myself in the dim light of my office. Oh, Martha, I've learned my place. My place was no longer to be her victim. It was to be her equal. And that terrified her. Because if I wasn't her victim anymore, what did that make her? Just a bitter woman, desperate to maintain relevance through cruelty. I started to gain unexpected allies. Aunt Helen, Martha's younger sister, called me the following week. Sarah, dear, I heard Martha was there. Yes, he was. And how was it? Something in her tone caught my attention. There was genuine curiosity, but also something more. Interesting, I replied carefully. Helen laughed. A low, almost conspiratorial sound. I bet it was. Martha doesn't like it when people don't react the way she expects. Bingo. Do you speak from experience? Honey, Helen sighed. I've lived with Martha for 60 years. I know exactly how she works. And how does it work? She needs to be the center. She needs to control people's reactions. When someone doesn't dance to her tune, Helen stopped. Well, she gets desperate. Desperate how? She steps up. She tries harder. She recruits others. Until the person breaks or she completely loses power over that person. I smiled into the phone. And what happens then? Then, Helen said with evident satisfaction, she becomes irrelevant. The conversation with Helen was revealing. I wasn't alone. Other family members also saw through Martha's facade. They just never had the courage to act. But I did. And that inspired them. David's brother Robert approached me at a cousin's birthday party. Sarah, he said quietly, I don't know what you did, but Martha is agitated. Agitated how? She calls everyone complaining about you. Saying you've changed. That you're being disrespectful. He stopped, looking at me directly. But I was at Easter lunch. I saw how you behaved. You were polite, respectful. More respectful than she deserved. My heart raced. Why do you say that? Robert looked around, making sure no one was listening. Because I know how she treats people. How she treated my ex-wife. How she treats anyone who threatens her control. He moved closer. Keep doing what you're doing, Sarah. Someone needed to stand up to her a long time ago. The plan was maturing. It wasn't just about my personal revenge anymore. It was about freeing the entire family from Martha's tyranny. Audio was my weapon. But now I had something more powerful. Allies. People who were tired of living under her thumb. Who wanted to see her mask fall. Christmas was fast approaching. The perfect event. The whole family gathered. Martha at the height of her annual performance as benevolent matriarch. It would be the ideal stage for his downfall. But first, I needed to make sure all the elements were in place. May all allies be ready. That Martha was at the peak of her confidence and vulnerability. I smiled as I marked the date on the calendar. December 25th. The day Martha would discover she had completely underestimated the wrong woman. December arrived with the biting cold of winter and the promise of a revelation that would change everything. I had become a ruthless strategist, every move calculated with surgical precision. Martha's audio was no longer just a recording, it was the heart of a meticulously planned operation. I spent hours testing different playback devices. My iPhone, a portable Bluetooth speaker, even Martha's home stereo, which I knew well from years of family dinners. Each test was a controlled variable. Volume, clarity, range. The acoustics needed to be perfect. I started planting subtle seeds in the weeks leading up to Christmas. During a casual lunch with my sisters-in-law, I let slip a seemingly innocent observation. It's interesting how different people can be in public and in private, don't you think? Lisa, always eager for gossip, took the bait immediately. What do you mean? Nothing specific, I replied, absently stirring my coffee. Just a general observation. Sometimes we discover surprising things about people we think we know well. The silence that followed was filled with curiosity. Perfect. With Robert, I was more direct. You mentioned that Martha has been agitated lately. We were in the supermarket parking lot, away from prying ears. Yes, she is. She's calling everyone, trying to form some kind of coalition against you. Coalition. She wants everyone to agree that you're problematic, that you need to be fixed. I chuckled softly. And people are agreeing? Robert looked at me with something that seemed like admiration. Some are. Others. He shrugged. Others are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? Why does she care so much about your behavior? Why does she need you to react a certain way? He paused. Why is she so desperate to control you? Excellent. Helen has become my most valuable ally. Over tea at her house, away from Martha's eyes and ears, she told me stories I had never heard. Martha was always like that, she said, serving homemade cookies. Even when we were kids. She needed to be the center. She needed everyone to dance to her tune. What if they didn't dance? She made their lives hell. Helen sighed. My first sister-in-law, Robert's first wife, suffered greatly at her hands. What happened? Martha tortured her psychologically. Subtle comments. Public humiliations. Until the poor thing had a nervous breakdown. My blood ran cold. Really? Martha never admitted it, of course. She said the woman was unstable. That she wasn't suitable for the family. Helen looked at me directly. But I saw what she did. I saw how she systematically destroyed that woman. And nobody did anything? Who would? Martha is very good at making it seem like the victim is always to blame. Helen's revelation gave me a new perspective. I wasn't Martha's first victim. I probably wouldn't be the last. Unless I did something about it. The audio wasn't just about my personal revenge anymore. It was about breaking a pattern of abuse that had lasted decades. It was about justice. I began to observe Martha with the eyes of an investigator. At my father-in-law's birthday dinner, I studied her every move. How she manipulated conversations. How she redirected attention. How she planted seeds of discord. She was particularly aggressive with me that night. Sarah, dear, he said over dinner, his voice cutting through the general conversation, you've been so quiet lately. Problems at work. All eyes turned to me, the moment she was orchestrating. Before I would have blushed. Stuttered. Tried to explain myself. Now, just smile serenely. No problem. In fact, I've been quite productive. How about you, Martha? How's your volunteer work going? The question caught her off guard. She wasn't expecting a counterattack. My volunteer work is fine. That's great. It must be rewarding to help others. My tone was genuinely interested, especially when you have so much free time. The insinuation was subtle, but present. Martha didn't work. She lived off her husband's money. Her face flushed slightly. Every interaction was a test, an opportunity to study their reactions, to map their weaknesses. I discovered that Martha didn't know how to handle calm. She thrived on drama, on emotional reactions. My serenity unnerved her. I discovered that she hated being questioned. Any direct question about her behavior or motivations made her defensive. And I found out she was getting desperate. 2 weeks before Christmas, Martha made her boldest move yet. She organized a ladies' luncheon, all the wives and daughters of the family, ostensibly to plan the Christmas festivities. In reality, it was an intervention. Sitting around her dining table, with plates of salad and glasses of white wine, Martha began her attack. Girls, she said, her voice taking on that fake maternal tone, I'm worried about our Sarah. All heads turned to me. I continued eating my salad, seemingly uninterested. She's been so different lately, cold, distant. Lisa nodded vigorously. I noticed too. Perhaps, Martha continued, she's going through some kind of crisis. Personal or professional. The insinuation was clear. I was having mental problems. It's a shame, he sighed dramatically, when someone we love leaves the family. Heavy silence. Then Helen spoke. Martha, his voice was calm but firm, Sarah is right here. Why don't you ask her directly how she is, instead of talking about her as if she weren't there? The shock on Martha's face was delicious. I was just expressing concern. Then express it to her, not about her. All heads turned to me again. I placed my fork gently on my plate. I wiped my lips with my napkin. I looked directly at Martha. Thank you for your concern, Martha. But I'm doing very well. In fact, I've never felt better. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. If there's something specific you'd like to discuss with me, I'm here. Ready to talk. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha opened and closed her mouth several times. She had orchestrated this ambush, but I had turned the tables. No, there's nothing specific. Great. I smiled warmly. So, can we talk about Christmas? I'm looking forward to our celebration. Lunch ended in palpable embarrassment. Martha had tried to publicly humiliate me and failed spectacularly. Worse still, she had exposed herself. Revealed her true nature to anyone who cared to see. Helen walked me to the car. Well played, he said softly. Thanks. She's getting desperate, you know. I know. Desperate people do stupid things. I looked at her. What are you trying to tell me? I'm telling you to be prepared. She's going to try something at Christmas. Something big. Smut. I'm counting on it. That night, I listened to the audio once more. That Sarah needs to learn her place. Poor David, poor thing. Needy, with no future of his own. My husband, invalid in certain areas of married life. My sisters are two frustrated women without marriage and without children. Every word was a bullet in the chamber of my gun. Christmas was only 2 weeks away. Martha would be at the peak of her annual performance. Surrounded by family. Confident in her power. It would be the perfect moment for his downfall. I checked my phone again. The audio was saved in 3 different locations. The quality was crystal clear. The volume was tested and approved. Everything was ready. Martha had spent decades building her image as a benevolent matriarch. Decades of manipulation and control. In a few weeks, all of this would fall apart, and it would be her own voice that would destroy everything she had built. The irony was delicious. Smile in the dark. Checkmate, Martha. Christmas Day arrived dressed in cinematic perfection. Snowflakes danced lazily against the windows of Martha's house, creating a scene worthy of a Christmas card. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and roast turkey permeated every room, mingling with the expensive perfume of the white lilies that adorned each table. The house was impeccable, every detail orchestrated with military precision. Just like Martha, she strode around the room like a queen in her palace, wearing a navy silk ensemble that cost more than many people's monthly salary. Her hair was perfectly arranged in an elegant bun. Her jewelry, genuine pearls and discreet diamonds, captured the light from the strategically placed candles. She was the embodiment of the benevolent matriarch, the farce I was about to destroy. I arrived with David at 2 in the afternoon, carrying my traditional contribution, a pecan pie that Martha always criticized but that the others loved. Sarah, dear. She greeted me with that smile. The same smile that had preceded decades of humiliation. What a festive dress. First pinprick. He hadn't even taken off his coat. Thank you, Martha. You look stunning as always. My voice was pure honey. No detectable irony. She blinked, confused by the lack of reaction. Perfect. The room teemed with 23 family members. 3 generations gathered under one roof. Animated conversations. Genuine laughter. Children running among the adults. It was the ideal setting for what was to come. Lily was there, radiant in her red velvet dress, her curly hair tied back with a gold ribbon, She ran to me as soon as she saw me. "Aunt Sarah." Her little arms wrapped around me in a tight hug. "Did you bring the pecan pie?" "Of course, dear." She whispered in my ear, "Grandma Martha is being annoying today. She complained that my dress was too short." I smiled, stroking her hair. "Your dress is perfect, Lily. You look beautiful." Martha watched our interaction with a hawk's eye. Always vigilant, always in control. The dinner passed with the usual pomp. Elaborate dishes served on fine china. Expensive wines in crystal glasses. Martha carefully steered conversations toward topics that suited her. I remained quiet, watching, waiting. Martha was particularly aggressive toward me, as if she sensed something was different, as if her predatory instincts detected danger. "Sarah," she said over the main course, her voice cutting through the general conversation, "you've been so absent lately. Marital problems?" All conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, the spotlight she loved so much. Before, I would have blushed, stuttered, tried to defend myself. Now, I just gently placed my fork on the plate. "Why do you ask that, Martha?" My voice was soft but clear. "Is there something specific about my marriage that concerns you?" She opened and closed her mouth. She hadn't expected a direct counterattack. "But just care about you guys." How kind. My smile was serene. "David and I are doing very well. Thank you for asking." I went back to eating as if nothing had happened, but something had changed in the atmosphere. I could feel it. The second attempt came during dessert. "Sarah, haven't you learned how to make the family Christmas pudding yet?" Martha asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a tradition that's been passed down from mother to daughter-in-law for generations." The insinuation was clear. "You do not belong to this family." "No, I haven't learned yet," I replied calmly. "Maybe you can teach me someday." "Of course, dear, if you're interested in learning our traditions." The venom in his voice was almost palpable. "I'm very interested," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "Especially in the more authentic family traditions." The word authentichung in the air like a promise. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room to exchange gifts. It was the moment I was waiting for. Martha positioned herself strategically near the fireplace, where the golden light from the flames created a halo around her. She loved being the center of attention during the gift opening. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice echoing through the room, "I'd like to make a toast." All conversation ceased. All heads turned toward her. "Perfect." She raised her champagne glass, the crystal catching the candlelight. "To our family," he began, his voice taking on that grand tone I knew so well. "To the bonds that bind us. To the unconditional love we share. And to the importance of maintaining our traditions and values." She paused dramatically, her eyes sweeping the room. "Because that's what makes us special. That's what sets us apart. Our ability to love each other unconditionally, to support each other, to be a true family." Polite applause echoed around the room. It was then that I stood up. "Excuse me, Martha," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. All eyes turned to me. The silence was absolute. "Before we proceed with the gifts, I have something very important to share with you all." Martha looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Sarah, dear, perhaps this can wait?" "No," I interrupted softly. "It can't wait." I took my phone from my pocket with deliberate movements, each gesture calculated for maximum impact. "It's something that will illuminate the true essence of some of the bonds in our family. A story that needs to be heard. A truth that can no longer be silenced." The silence was deafening. Even the children had stopped moving. Martha tried to intervene again. "Sarah, I really think..." But it was too late. I pressed play. Martha's voice filled the room like a materialized ghost. "Of course it was on purpose, dear. That Sarah needs to learn her place. She thinks she's too important, too good for our family." The shock was instantaneous. Faces paled. Mouths dropped open. Eyes widened. But the audio continued, relentless. "Poor David the guy. Needy, with no future of his own, he was lucky to get a wife with money. He's a hypocrite, always draining her resources to fund his fantasies, but that's fine with me. He gives me expensive gifts, seeking my approval. David went white as a sheet, his eyes fixed on his mother with an expression of growing horror. And my husband, well, you know how crippled he is in certain areas of married life. He's lucky he has the money to afford the lifestyle I deserve. Otherwise, I would have gotten rid of this dead weight years ago. Uncle Robert let out an audible groan. His wife clapped her hand over her mouth in shock. My sisters are two frustrated women without marriage or children. They depend on my generosity like trained dogs. They do everything I want because they know they need my charity. Helen and Margaret, Martha's sisters, were paralyzed. Tears began to stream down Margaret's face. The audio continued for a few more seconds before I hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. Sepulchral. Martha was petrified. His expression underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. First, abject shock, eyes wide, mouth open, as if he'd seen a ghost. Then pure rage, his face turned scarlet, the veins in his neck stood out, his hands shook. Finally, despair, as the reality of what had happened hit her like a runaway train. That's... She stammered, her voice coming out as a strangled squeak. That's your voice, Martha, he said calmly. Your words. Your true opinions about every person in this room. She lunged at me, trying to snatch the phone from my hands. Turn it off. Turn it off now. But David intercepted her. For the first time in his adult life, he held his mother's arms, preventing her from attacking me. Mom, stop. His voice was dead, emotionless. It's too late. The family's reaction was devastating. Some were in silent shock, processing what they had heard. Others began to cry, especially Martha's sisters, who discovered what she really thought of them. Robert stood up slowly, his face a mask of pain and anger. 40 years, he said, his voice shaking. 40 years of marriage, and this is what you think of me? Martha tried to explain herself, but the words came out as incoherent noises. That was taken out of context. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Robert replied. Your own voice condemned me. Helen approached me, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, for finally showing who she really is. Lily, my little niece, observed everything with that frightening clarity that only children possess. She came closer to me and held my hand. Aunt Sarah, she whispered, now everyone knows the truth, right? I smiled at her, stroking her curly hair. Yes, dear. Now everyone knows. Martha tried one last time to regain control. You don't understand, she shouted, her shrill voice echoing through the room. That was a private conversation. You have no right to judge. Private conversation? David's voice was pure ice. Mom, you were talking about your own family. About me. About my wife? About your husband. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. Sarah, I'm so sorry. For everything. For never standing up for you. For not seeing this sooner. For the first time, he was on my side. Completely. Martha, realizing that she had lost even her son, did the only thing left to do. He ran away. Without a word, she turned and ran out of the room, her high heels echoing down the hallway like gunshots. The front door slammed shut. And then silence. What followed was a collective catharsis. People who had been silenced for decades finally found their voices. Stories of manipulation and cruelty came to light. Tears were shed. Hugs were given. The family, for the first time in decades, was being honest with each other. And in the center of it all, I remained calm. Serene. I felt no petty triumph. There was no malicious joy. Just a deep sense of relief. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been served. And Martha, the tyrannical matriarch who had terrorized her family for decades, had finally been unmasked. His crown lay shattered on the floor. And I, Sarah, had found my voice. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a final shot. Martha had fled. Literally fled her own Christmas party, leaving behind only the echo of her venomous words and the crushing weight of the revealed truth. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense. like the air before a storm that has finally passed, leaving the world clean but devastated. I stood in the center of the room, my phone still in hand, watching the shock waves ripple across the faces around me. Each person processed the revelation differently, but they all shared the same underlying expression: relief. As if an invisible weight they had carried for decades had finally been lifted. David was the first to move. He approached me with slow, deliberate steps. His eyes, which had so long avoided mine in moments of conflict, now looked directly at me. "Sarah." His voice was hoarse, thick with emotion. I didn't know. I had no idea she. He paused, struggling to find words. "Lie," he said softly. "You knew. Deep down, you always knew." He lowered his head, ashamed. "You're right, I knew. But it was easier to pretend I didn't see. It was easier to let you suffer than to face her." Tears began to stream down her face. "I'm a coward, Sarah. A pathetic coward who let the woman I love be tortured by my mother because I was afraid to confront her." I reached out and gently touched his face. "David, you're not that man anymore. The man who defended me today, who held your mother back when she tried to attack me, that's the man I married." He held my hand against his face, like it was an anchor. "How can you forgive me?" "Because," he said, looking into her eyes, "you finally chose a side. Our side." Robert was sitting in an armchair, his head in his hands. 40 years of marriage. 40 years believing his wife loved him, only to discover she considered him dead weight and an invalid. His eldest daughter, Jennifer, knelt beside him. "Dad, you can't take this seriously." She was just venting. Talking nonsense. Robert slowly raised his head. His eyes were red, but there was more to them than just pain. There was clarity. "No, Jennifer. She wasn't talking nonsense. She was telling the truth. You're true." He stood up, squaring his shoulders. "And now I know exactly where I stood in this marriage. Where I've always stood." The determination in his voice was palpable. Martha's sisters were huddled together on the couch, crying silently. Helen looked up as I approached. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us who she really is. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Margaret, the youngest, wiped away her tears. "Don't be sorry. We needed to know. We needed to hear it with our own ears." She stopped, taking a deep breath. 60 years. 60 years of being treated like charity. Like trained dogs. Helen nodded bitterly. "But not anymore. Never again." Lily approached me, her eyes wide and curious. "Aunt Sarah, why is everyone crying? Did Grandma Martha do something wrong?" I knelt down to be at her level. "Remember when you told me that real adults don't need to put others down to feel great?" She nodded. "Well, Grandma Martha was putting people down. And sometimes when someone does that for a long time, you have to show everyone what's going on." Lily thought for a moment. "Like when Tommy at school was being mean to everyone, and the teacher showed it to his parents?" "Exactly like that." She smiled. "So you're like the teacher. You showed everyone that Grandma Martha was being mean." The simplicity and clarity of a child. Sometimes that's all we need. In the minutes that followed, something extraordinary happened. People started talking. Really talking. Stories that had been kept hidden for years began to emerge. Small acts of cruelty. Subtle manipulation. Moments of humiliation that each had suffered in silence. Jennifer recounted how Martha had sabotaged her first marriage, planting doubts about her husband until the relationship imploded. Robert Jr. revealed how his mother had interfered in his career, using connections to undermine him when he didn't follow her advice. A distant cousin mentioned how Martha had spread rumors about her after a minor argument. It was as if a dam had broken, decades of silence and fear spilling out in a torrent of long-suppressed truths. And in the center of it all, I watched with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness for the lives that had been harmed. Satisfaction because finally the truth was being told. About an hour later, the phone rang. "Era Martha." David answered, putting it on speakerphone so everyone could hear. "David." Her voice was shrill, desperate. "David, you need to come get me. My car isn't working." But we all knew it was a lie. Where are you, Mom? At the mall. I came to do some shopping and... His voice broke. Please, son. Come get me. We can talk about this. We can work this out. David looked around the room. At his family. At me? No. We can't work this out. David, please. You can't believe that audio. It was just a private conversation. I was upset. Mom, David said, his voice firm, you called my wife arrogant. You said I'm a loser who lives off her. You called your own husband dead weight. Silence on the other end of the line. Those weren't words spoken in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated, cold conversation. That's how you really felt. David, No. It's over, Mo. Call a taxi. He hung up. The rest of the night passed in a surreal atmosphere. Some people left early, needing time to process what had happened. Others stayed, finding comfort in the company of people who finally understood their experiences. We ate Christmas dinner without Martha. And for the first time in decades, the conversations were genuine, honest, free from the fear of reprisal. The children played without the underlying tension that always permeated family gatherings when Martha was present. The adults laughed, really laughed, without worrying about whether they were being too loud or inappropriate. It was as if the family had been freed from an invisible prison. When David and I finally got home, it was already past midnight. We sat on the living room couch, still processing the night's events. Sarah, he said, breaking the silence, how did you get that audio? I told him about Lily, about the accidental recording, about the months of planning. He listened to me in silence, nodding occasionally. Did you plan all this? I planned. For months. For months. He was silent for a long time. Do you hate me? He finally asked. I turned to look at him. David, if I hated you, I would have divorced you a long time ago. I love you. But I couldn't live with your mother humiliating you while you pretended not to see it. And now, he said, taking her hand, we can start over. Without her between us. Without her fear. Just the two of us. He shook my hand. I promise, Sarah. I promise I'll never let anyone treat you like that again. I'll never be a coward again. I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine determination. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the day's events. The look of shock on Martha's face as her own voice condemned her. The relief in the family's eyes when the truth finally came out. David's transformation from submissive son to protective husband. I felt no remorse. I felt no guilt. I felt peace. For the first time in years, I felt complete peace. Martha had built her power on lies, manipulation, and fear. I had destroyed that power with the one thing she couldn't fight. The truth. Your own truth told in your own words. And now, finally, I was free. The war was over. And I had won. Not because I destroyed Martha, but because I found myself. I smiled in the dark and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life. And I couldn't wait to live it. 6 months after the Christmas that changed everything, I was in our garden, kneeling among the rose beds I had planted in the spring. The family's transformation was gradual but profound. Martha didn't return home that Christmas Eve. Robert found her 3 days later in a downtown hotel, drinking alone at the bar and trying to convince strangers that her family had conspired against her. The divorce was finalized in April. Robert, at 62, discovered a version of himself that had been stifled for decades. He moved into a small but cozy apartment near the lake. He began fishing again, something Martha had always considered a waste of time for men without ambition. Martha's sisters also flourished. Helen, finally free from her older sister's shadow, began traveling. At 58, she visited Paris and Rome and was planning a trip to Japan. Margaret went back to school. She enrolled in an art course at the local university, something she'd always wanted to do, but which Martha had derided as a bored woman's hobby. His early paintings were vibrant, bursting with color that seemed to explode from the canvas. It was as if decades of pent-up creativity had finally found expression. David has become the man I always knew he could be. Freeing himself from maternal control was like removing an anchor that had kept him submerged. He became more confident at work, more assertive in his decisions, and more present in our marriage. Lily, my unwitting little heroine, remained the perceptive and courageous child she always was. The most profound change, however, was in myself. I had found my voice, not just the courage to speak, but the wisdom to know when to speak, how to speak, and why to speak. At work, I became a more effective leader. I stopped accepting projects that didn't value me. I started negotiating salaries with confidence. I stood up for colleagues who were being treated unfairly. In my social relationships, I established clear boundaries. I no longer tolerated passive-aggressive comments or attempts at manipulation from anyone. And in my marriage, I became a true partner, not the silent victim I had been, nor the defensive wife I could have become, but a strong woman who chose to love and be loved authentically. One spring morning, 3 years after that life-changing Christmas, I received a letter. It was from a woman I didn't know, but who had heard my story through a mutual friend. Sarah's Way. The letter said, "Your courage inspired me to find my own voice. After 20 years of being belittled by my mother-in-law, I finally had the strength to set boundaries. Thank you for showing me that it is possible." Tears filled my eyes. My journey hadn't just been about my own liberation. It had become a beacon for other women struggling in the shadows. To any woman listening to this and recognizing her own story in my words, let me say this. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You deserve respect, love, and dignity. And it's never too late to find the courage to reclaim your life. Sometimes deliverance comes in great dramatic revelations. Sometimes it comes in small, daily acts of self-respect. But it always comes when we decide we deserve more.